This is a follow-up video to my last video talking about connecting a USB mouse. And in that video, I leveraged an Arduino Mega and a Mega with a USB host shield on it. And I connected the mouse to that host shield, which is using SPI between those two components. And then I also connected SPI to my 286. So from my 286, I could make an SPI call to the Mega. The Mega could use SPI to talk to the host shield to talk to the mouse. And that worked, and it was a very nice, smooth, nice action, felt good, or a good experience as far as the mouse is concerned. Had a comment from PVC on YouTube just suggesting that, well, maybe I could just directly use the PS2 protocol because most of these USB mice have that capability. And as I flipped my mouse over, it does say it's USB, it's an optical USB and PS2 compatible mouse. And so I thought, okay, let me see if I can go figure out how to interface with the PS2 directly, and basically using the fallback compatibility mode of the mouse. And that's what I've now done. And you'll see that I haven't gone all the way to the point yet of the 286 directly interfacing with the USB mouse through that PS2 protocol. For now, I'm using a Nano just because I wanted to make sure I could get the basic communication with the mouse figured out, and then I can come back to a 286 implementation of it later if I want to do that. So what I've done essentially is taken the USB mouse. I just have a little adapter. It's basically a stand. It's a PCB mount for a USB, and I just soldered 4 wires onto it. And I brought those 4 wires into a small breadboard for the time being. And so 2 of those wires are my VCC and my ground, which I'm really just pulling off of the Nano, which is coming from power right here. The other 2 are the 2 data lines. There's a positive and a negative data line that comes from this USB connector. And essentially then when it goes into PS2 mode, it's really using one of those as a clock and then the other one as data. And so I've then connected those 2 over to this Nano. So there's just a little jumper that connects from here to the 2 pins that I'm using on the Nano to read that clock or write that clock, either way. And the same with the data, to read or write the data. And I have a couple of pull-up resistors on those lines. I've grounded it to my 286. In my last video, I forgot to add the ground from the Mega to the 286. It was working fine, I'm sure, because ultimately it does get back to a common ground, but I did add this ground here just to be safe. And then I have my 4 SPI lines. I've not changed any code on the 286, so the exact same code. Well, I take that back. The code is essentially the same, other than I had to increase the delay just slightly from what I was using on the Mega. And I think it's just because the Nano isn't quite as fast, even though I'm now using hardware SPI. So I'm using the hardware SPI capability of the Nano. 286 is using the same calls as it was to the Mega. It's just within the Nano, I'm now using hardware. And so dealing with and sending back data for SPI is actually quite a bit simpler when you use the hardware side of it. So I'm using the hardware, but I had to increase the delay just slightly. So I've got to do maybe some tuning or tweaking of this on my 286 side, or maybe on the Nano side. But and when I say slightly increase the delay, I mean very, very slightly. So, but what you're seeing on the screen here is as I move my mouse, really it's the same result as what I had before. I do notice every once in a while there's a little glitch where I see the mouse location pop to a little spot that doesn't look quite right. So I've got to look into what that might be, and I think that goes back to me just getting some of this timing right. It's probably me reading data and not getting the data back fast enough, and it's a little bit off in my SPI. So I'll look at that. But generally here, what I'm looking at is the same type of functionality. I can move the mouse around. I do think the the Mega was processing it better than this little Nano can at the moment. Which does also make me question if I want to put that load onto my 286. Even if it's just all done with interrupts, which right now I'm in a polling mode, so keep that in mind too. That could be part of the issue here too. But when I get to an interrupt mode, do I really want the 286 having to do all these extra calculations about calculating position and things like that? Or do I want to offload that, let the Nano deal with it, and have the 286 just simply fetch screen coordinates when it needs to? It's not a big deal either way. And I think if I get to the point of connecting to my 286, I have a pair of PPIs in here, and those PPIs really, I have one that's driving a speaker, I'm driving the LCD, and I'm taking PS2 keyboard input, and I have some open ports, so I think, and I've got headers available to use those ports, so I could just solder in these headers and bring in this data, basically these couple of data lines from the mouse into one of these and do all of the code entirely on the 286 and completely get rid of the Nano if I want to do that. And I think I'm going to try doing that at some point. I just don't know if it'll be right away. I think what I'll do for the short term is probably, take this connection, get it soldered onto here better, and get rid of all the wires, and really just simply have power coming in along with the connection to the mouse, and then I'll just have the 4 wires that go over here plus a ground, so 5 wires that connect from this to the 286. And then I can just set that board wherever. I could just set it right here for now. So that might be my short term until I get around to more time to re-implement the code on the Nano into the 286. And like I said, I don't think that's going to be difficult. It's just going to take a little bit of time to do it. If I show you my code real quick, just on the Nano side of things, I did put a bunch of links up here that I found helpful, and there really was some nice source code available out there to work with a PS2 mouse. So that gave me a nice start to kind of see how it works, and I leveraged some of that and maybe simplified it for my purpose. And then I found some nice articles that also talk about the PS2 mouse. And PVC had also helped me with some commentary on the YouTube channel too. So thank you for that. But basically this is doing something very similar to what the Mega was doing. But in this case, I'm using the hardware pins for SPI. So typical SPI type of code here where I'm setting the mode for the pins, I'm turning on interrupts, and then I have that interrupt procedure down here, which you can see is actually quite simple now. So really I'm going to still send 4 calls from the 286 to the Nano. And basically, I'm going to send back 3 bytes of data that I care about, and then 1 byte of data that really doesn't matter. And that's what this code is doing here, is just simply returning this D word to send. Basically, this is containing, go back up, a format that looks like this. So it's got all my X position, my Y position, and then I change the order of my mouse buttons, but basically middle, right, left mouse button data. And then when I get down here, I'm just grabbing that, pulling out the appropriate byte based on what part of the sequence am I in. Is this the first, second, or third byte that I should be sending? And I send that out. So really simple interrupt service routine for that. So the coding part of that is nice and easy. And then I guess if I jump down, I've got my loop procedure. So this Nano is just constantly checking the mouse data. So it goes out and says, get me the mouse data. And I'm tracking if anything's changed. And if nothing has changed, then I skip out of all the rest of this code since it would be kind of pointless. But assuming something on the mouse changed, and in this case it's either X, Y, or button data, or actually full status data, which includes button data. Then I just check and I make sure that any movement doesn't take me off my screen. So if I hit the far left edge, it just stops, and same with the top, right, and bottom. So when I hit those edges, that's all this code is doing, is just checking to make sure I stay within bounds. And then I take all of the values that I'm actually going to use for button data, the screen position, after I've validated it. And this is really XY based on the screen, put it into that variable, and remember the previous values, and that's it. So this code, really outside of the serial code, is quite simple. And as far as serial code, I've got these links up here if anybody wants to go follow and look up some of that sample code. And this one I used here is actually based off of another one, so you can kind of follow the rabbit trail there if you want to get back to the original source of some of that. But I just took the concepts and maybe implemented it all in a single INO file here instead of having separate files, classes, and things like that, which works fine for what I'm doing because this is a really simple thing. But part of this was the whole making sure I can initialize the mouse. So initially, when I was plugging in the mouse, not having done PS2 mouse before, I didn't realize you had to do some initialization to get that up and running. So I do have that code here, basically, that goes through and gets the initialization going. You have to send it in FF to start, and then you have to send it in F4. And once you get that done, now you can start reading data off of the mouse. It starts streaming a ton of data. And as I was doing this, I was using my logic analyzer. I have one from Digilent, and that it comes in really handy. I just plug in the 2 wires, and I can quickly see everything I'm sending and getting back, and making sure the values look correct and things like that. So that gets it going. That gets the stream running, and then down here I can just constantly read out that data and do something with it. So that's all I had in this video, just showing that I've now cut down this entire thing down to this little nano. And then the next step now would be if I want to take it and put it onto 286 code and just directly connect the mouse and a couple of resistors to one of these PPIs. So that might be my next challenge. Not sure when I'll do that. Like I said, I think for now I'm going to stick with the Nano just because this is really simple. What I do need to do yet, though, for sure, is add interrupt support. So basically, when the mouse moves, if the data has changed, then I'm going to actually pull an interrupt line, and then that interrupt line will actually come out and read the mouse data from the Nano. Instead of right now, it's just constantly pulling, and that pulling is going to affect other things in the system, so I need to get that out of there. But for testing, this is sufficient. So I'll post an update maybe at some point if I get that interrupt working, and or shift it over to my 286 entirely and completely forego the Nano.